My life in Buffalo, New York had always been built on careful planning, logic, and trust. In our circle of friends, I was the steady one, the reliable problem solver who approached everything methodically. I'd never been the type to make impulsive decisions or jump to conclusions without evidence. Perhaps that's why, when I first sensed something off in my marriage, I tried my best to dismiss it as paranoia. But those first suspicions crept in like a chill draft through a cracked window, subtle yet impossible to ignore. It started with small changes in my wife Emily's behavior that only someone who knew her as well as I did would notice. Emily had always been warm, attentive, and honest, or so I believed. We'd been married for 9 years, and in all that time I never had reason to doubt her fidelity. Yet, over the past few months, she had grown strangely distant. At first, it was little things. I'd walk into the room and catch her hastily locking her phone, a guilty flicker in her eyes before she forced a smile. She started taking her phone with her everywhere, even into the bathroom, something she never bothered with before. When it buzzed with texts late at night, she would silence it quickly and say it was just spam, or a coworker with a question, her voice a little too casual. Her daily routine began to shift in ways that didn't quite add up. Normally, Emily and I commuted together most mornings. She worked in downtown Buffalo as a project manager at a tech firm, and I led an engineering team at a manufacturing company out in the suburbs. We'd leave the house around the same time and share a quick kiss goodbye before heading to our separate cars. Lately, though, she began rushing out earlier than me, claiming she wanted to beat traffic or grab an early start on a project. In the evenings, there were more and more instances of her texting that she'd be home late because Brian needed me to stay to finish a report, or that she was grabbing a bite with a friend after work. At first, I accepted those explanations. Emily was dedicated to her job and sometimes pulled long hours, and she also had a small circle of close girlfriends she occasionally met with. But it struck me as odd that these late nights were happening more frequently, and often on short notice. On a couple of those occasions, I offered to drop by her office downtown and take her to dinner after her work, thinking it might be a nice surprise. Each time she shot down the suggestion quickly, too quickly, with some excuse. Oh, I won't have time to break for dinner. This deadline is crazy, or my friend is going through a rough time. It might be a late heart-to-heart, better not wait up. Her tone was breezy, but something in it felt off, like a faint tremor beneath the surface. I began to feel a quiet unease. I told myself that it was stress or my imagination, but the feeling only grew. One evening stands out in memory. A chilly October night, the wind rattling the bare branches outside. Emily had told me that morning that she planned to have a girls' night with her friend Megan after work. Dinner and maybe a movie. I remember joking, "Don't have too much fun without me." And she gave me a peck on the cheek with a strangely distant smile. That night, I cooked a simple pasta for myself and tried to focus on a book. But I found myself glancing at the clock every few minutes as 7 p.m. became 8, then 9. She hadn't texted much, just a brief note around 6 saying, "At dinner now, it might go late. Love you." It was almost 10:30 p.m. when I finally heard her key in the front door. I was curled up on their couch, pretending to watch TV, though I'd long lost track of whatever show was playing. Emily stepped in quietly, wearing a black dress I hadn't seen before. Her cheeks were flushed pink from the cold outside or from something else, and her brown hair was windblown and a bit messy. She looked startled when she saw me still awake. "Hey," she said softly, offering a quick, almost rehearsed smile. I thought you'd be asleep." "I tried, but you know I can't sleep well without you here," I replied, forcing a little chuckle. "How was girls' night?" She busied herself hanging up her coat instead of meeting my eyes. "Oh, it was fun. We went to that new wine bar on Elmwood. Megan and I got a little caught up talking about her new job, and time flew. Sorry it's so late." There was a hollowness in my chest as I listened. I wanted to believe her, but something didn't line up. Megan was one of her closest friends, true, but Megan was also an early riser who rarely stayed out past 9 due to her morning gym routine. It struck me as odd that Megan, of all people, would be out sipping wine until 10:30 on a weeknight. Emily must have sensed my doubt because she finally turned to face me, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, a nervous habit of hers. "We kind of lost track of time. It was nice to catch up," she said. The words a little too even, too practiced. I managed to smile and stood up to hug her. She felt tense in my arms. "I'm glad you had fun," I said quietly. "You deserve a break." As I held her, I caught a whiff of something unusual. Emily's favorite perfume, A light vanilla scent was there, but under it was a trace of a different smell, something musky and masculine that didn't belong. It was faint, but it was there, the kind of cologne that I knew wasn't mine. I didn't mention it. I simply pulled back and looked at her. You must be exhausted. Let's get to bed. She nodded, relief washing over her face as if she had expected an interrogation that never came. Yeah, I'm beat. We'll talk in the morning, okay? She hesitated, then added, Love you, with that same brittle smile. Love you too, I replied, and I meant it. At least the part of me that was clinging to the hope that this was all a misunderstanding meant it. But another part of me, a growing part, felt a sting of hurt and the first flickers of anger. That night I lay in bed awake long after Emily's breathing had slowed into the pattern of sleep. My mind was racing, replaying the details of the evening and all the other little incidents in recent weeks. My wife was lying to me, the realization settled like a stone in my stomach. The woman I had trusted implicitly for years was telling me elaborate stories. Fake girls' nights, phantom work obligations. Why? The obvious answer, the one I had been avoiding even formulating in my mind, was infidelity. I didn't want to believe that Emily, my Emily, could be cheating on me. We had always promised each other honesty, and we'd been through so much together, moving to Buffalo, buying our first home, each of us supporting the other through career ups and downs. We were a team, or so I thought. Yet the evidence was mounting that something was very wrong. Still, I told myself I needed something more concrete than suspicious behavior and a gut feeling. I needed proof, or at least a clearer indication before I'd let myself truly believe my wife was unfaithful. I got a piece of that proof a week later, and it hit me like a punch to the gut. It was a Saturday afternoon, and Emily was out running errands. She had left late in the morning, saying she needed to pick up a dress from the tailor and then do some grocery shopping. In truth, I expected she'd be meeting someone. I had no evidence, but her errand run felt like another pretext. I almost offered to join her, but something stopped me. Part of me didn't want to trail her like a suspicious husband, at least not yet. Instead, I busied myself cleaning up around the house. I'm not sure what I was looking for. Maybe I hoped I'd stumble on a clue that would either allay my fears or confirm them. Rummaging through the clutter of our home felt invasive and wrong, but I was growing desperate for answers. It was while emptying the trash bin in our home office that I found it. A crumpled receipt, tossed carelessly among the waste paper. Normally, I wouldn't give a random receipt a second glance, but the bold header caught my eye. Curtis Hotel, Buffalo. I smoothed out the wrinkled paper with a trembling hand. The Curtis Hotel is one of downtown Buffalo's upscale boutique hotels. Not exactly the sort of place one goes to run a casual errand. The receipt was dated from 2 weekends ago, a Saturday when Emily had supposedly gone to a daytime networking event for local women in tech. I remember that day because I'd offered to drop her off, and she insisted on taking her own car, saying she'd probably go from the event to do some shopping. According to the receipt, however, she'd been at the Curtis Hotel. There was a charge for a couple's massage, 90 minutes at the hotel spa, time stamped at noon, followed by an afternoon room service charge for lunch and a bar charge for cocktails. The total was several $100s. My heart pounded in my chest as I scanned the itemized list. A couple's massage, 2 entrees, 2 drinks. I had to sit down because I suddenly felt lightheaded. The living room seemed to tilt for a moment. This was more than a subtle clue. It was a screaming alarm. There was no reason for Emily to be at that hotel, enjoying what clearly was a romantic day, unless she wasn't alone. And I certainly wasn't with her. Images flashed unbidden through my mind. Emily wrapped in a plush robe beside some faceless man sipping cocktails in the hotel bar. Emily with her hair down, laughing the way she used to laugh with me, but with someone else in a dim hotel room. I felt a surge of nausea and clenched my fists until I steadied myself. I read and reread that receipt, hoping I might find some benign explanation hidden in the text. But every line was damning. I realized my hands were shaking. I carefully folded the receipt and slipped it into my pocket. As if it were explosive evidence, it was, that I needed to hide away for now. My mind was reeling, a mix of devastation and a burgeoning anger starting to kindle within. When Emily returned home later that afternoon, carrying grocery bags and acting perfectly normal, I forced myself to act normal too. I helped her unload the groceries, all the while conscious of the crumpled paper hidden in my pocket. I felt as if it were burning a hole there. I was dying to confront her, to slam the receipt down on the counter and demand an explanation. But I held back. The rational part of me, the careful planner, whispered, "Not yet." I didn't have the full picture. Over the next few days, I became a detective in my own home, observing my wife with new eyes. I noted the way she would smile quietly at some text on her phone and then erase it. How she took slightly more care with her appearance on certain mornings. Those were often the evenings she came home late from work. There was a pattern emerging. Mondays and Thursdays, she almost always had an excuse to stay late or go out. She'd been volunteering for additional projects with her boss, a man named Brian Watson, or at least that's what she told me. I had met Brian a handful of times at her company's holiday parties and happy hours. He was in his mid-40s, a polished, confident operations director at her firm, with a friendly smile and an easy charm. He was married, I knew, because I'd spoken with his wife Linda at a charity dinner once. She was nice, a school teacher, and they had 2 young kids. Brian didn't strike me as the kind of guy who would jeopardize his family or his career by sleeping with a subordinate. But then again, what did I really know about him? I had to consider the possibility. Emily's increasing number of "Brian needs me to stay late" excuses correlated too perfectly with her suspect behavior. If she was indeed having an affair, Brian fit the picture. They spent a lot of time together at work and he had power and influence, things that unfortunately often play into workplace affairs. I hated the mental image of it. Emily, sitting close to him in a quiet corner of the office after hours, their heads together over a laptop, hands accidentally brushing. I shook the thought out of my head whenever it arose, but it kept coming back. Still, I had no hard evidence tying Emily's mysterious activities to Brian or anyone else specific. The receipt proved she was with someone, but not who. If it was Brian at that hotel with her, they had been awfully bold or careless to go to a high-end place in the city where they might easily run into someone they knew. Maybe they assumed I'd never see that bill if she paid with her own credit card, which she obviously intended, but she slipped up, leaving the statement out. Or maybe the affair partner was someone else entirely. Some old friend? Or a stranger even. That uncertainty gnawed at me. I needed to know exactly who I was dealing with. The turning point came one cold Wednesday evening in early November. By then, my suspicions were at a fever pitch, and the weight of pretending everything was fine had become nearly unbearable. That morning, Emily had mentioned she might be late again because, surprise, surprise, Brian wants me to help finalize the Johnson project report. It's due tomorrow. She gave me an apologetic smile over her coffee, and I just nodded as if it were no big deal. In reality, I had barely slept and my nerves were stretched thin. I decided it was time for a test. I left work a bit early that day, running on nervous energy. I needed to set a trap of my own, a way to catch her in a lie with minimal chance for her to wiggle out. Around 4:30 p.m., I sent Emily a text. Got a last-minute call from the client in Rochester. Heading there now. Might be late back or even stay overnight if it runs long. I'll keep you posted. Love you. I stared at the screen after pressing send, my heart thudding. Emily usually replied to my texts within minutes. This time, 5 minutes went by, then 10. I was driving aimlessly around our neighborhood by then, hands gripping the wheel when my phone buzzed. Her text popped up. "Okay, thanks for letting me know. Good luck with the client meeting. Drive safe. 3. No protest, no questions, not even an "I'll miss you." My stomach clenched. She had never had an issue with me traveling for work before, but usually she'd offer something like, "Oh, too bad. Hope it goes well," or "I'll miss you." This reply sounded neutral, even a bit eager for me to be away. Or perhaps I was reading into it. I pulled over in a quiet side street under a bare oak tree to think. The trap was set. She believed I was out of town for the evening. Now, would she seize the opportunity? I drove home but didn't pull into our driveway. Instead, I parked a block away under the shadow of an old maple and cut the engine. From there, I had a partial view of our house. The lights were off, which made sense since it was only a little after 5 and she was presumably still at work. I settled into wait, my pulse racing with anxiety and grim anticipation. The November night fell early and quickly, the sky turning charcoal gray by 5:30. I sat in the dark car, the heater on low to keep the windows from fogging. Time crawled. 6 o'clock passed. Around 6:20, I saw the headlights of Emily's car approaching. I slouched down instinctively as she turned into our driveway. From my angle, I could see her step out and hurry into the house, probably to change out of her work clothes. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting a second car to appear or someone to pull up to meet her. But the street remained empty and quiet, the houses around already dark or with people settled in for the evening. 15 minutes later, to my surprise, I saw the lights go out inside our house. Then Emily reemerged, now dressed in casual clothes, a dark pea coat and, from what I could tell, jeans and boots. She was carrying an overnight bag, the small duffel she uses when she goes to the gym or has a weekend trip. My heart thumped painfully against my ribs at the sight of that bag. Why would she need an overnight bag if she thought I was away on a business trip? Emily locked up the house and walked briskly to her car. As she reversed out of the driveway, I slid lower in my seat. She drove off, and I gave her a half-minute head start before I started my car and began to follow. I kept my distance, mindful to stay back far enough that she wouldn't notice me if she glanced in the mirror. Fortunately, the neighborhood streets were not busy. She headed towards the highway, and soon we were on I-90 going north into the city. Each passing mile made it harder for me to keep my emotions in check. Part of me still hoped she was going to some innocent destination. Maybe truly a friend's place after all. Maybe she just didn't want to stay alone at home knowing I was away. But the overnight bag suggested something else, something I could hardly bear to consider. Emily took the exit toward downtown Buffalo. The city skyline rose ahead, lights twinkling along the Lake Erie waterfront. My mind flashed to that receipt from the Curtis Hotel. Was she going there again? And with who? She didn't take the exit that would lead directly to the Curtis. Instead, she veered off toward an area of trendy restaurants and boutique hotels in the Allentown district. I tailed from a few cars behind, careful not to get too close at red lights. Eventually, she turned onto a side street lined with cozy eateries and pulled into a small parking lot behind a restaurant. I cruised past and parked half a block away on the street, where I had a decent view but hopefully didn't stand out. The sign on the front of the brick building glowed in soft cursive, Bella Trattoria. It was one of those intimate Italian restaurants that we'd been meaning to try together but never had. My throat tightened at the thought that she was here now with someone else. I watched from the shadows as Emily stepped out of her car. She had definitely dressed more carefully than one would for a quick dinner after working late. Even in the dim light, I could see she had put on makeup and her hair was neatly brushed and shining. She looked around furtively, hands tucked in her coat pockets against the chill. A minute later, another car pulled into the lot, a silver BMW sedan. It parked next to Emily's car. My jaw clenched as I recognized the man who got out under the pale glow of the street lamp. It was Brian Watson, her boss. Even though I had suspected it, seeing Brian in the flesh hit me like a jolt of electricity. He was the one. He had to be. Brian looked around as well, as if checking for familiar faces, then smiled at Emily. She walked up to him, and in that moment, any remaining hope I had that this might all be innocent vanished. Emily stepped into his arms, and they kissed. Not a friendly peck, but a slow, intimate kiss that lingered, as his hand slid around her waist. I felt as though all the air had been sucked out of my lungs. My hands shook, and I realized I was gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. A cold wave of anger and heartbreak washed over me, freezing me in place. It was true. It was all true. My wife was kissing another man, a man I knew, a man whose home I had been invited to for a summer barbecue, a man whose kids I had met. The sheer audacity and disrespect of them doing this out in the open, even if it was a quiet backlot, made my vision burn with rage. Instinctively, I reached over to the passenger seat where my phone lay. I raised it and snapped a photo through the windshield. My first picture was shaky. I steadied myself and took another, bracing the phone against the steering wheel. The lighting was poor, and they were partially turned away, but it was clearly them. Clearly a romantic embrace. Damn it, they didn't even bother to go inside before indulging in each other. They separated after a moment, and Brian said something I couldn't hear. Emily laughed softly, and they walked arm in arm into the side entrance of the restaurant. I sat in the car, stunned and trembling. The sight of them together had simultaneously broken my heart and ignited something cold and steely inside me. I felt tears of hurt in my eyes, but I blinked them back. I couldn't fall apart now. Not yet. I had to think. Even though it was hard to string together a coherent thought with the adrenaline and anger surging through me. My first wild impulse was to burst out of the car, charge into the restaurant, confront them in front of everyone. I imagined the shock on their faces, the stammered excuses, or perhaps the lack thereof. I imagined shouting, maybe throwing a punch at Brian, creating an ugly scene that would shatter their little romantic bubble. For a few moments, I let that fantasy play out in my head, my breathing ragged and my heart jackhammering. But then, the rational voice I've always trusted cut through the storm of emotions. Don't. Not yet. Think. If I went in there now, I'd be giving up any advantage I had. They would deny everything, or even if they admitted it, that confrontation would likely end in chaos, and then they'd close ranks. Emily might become defensive or run off with him. Brian might cause a scene that could even get police involved if it got heated. And crucially, I would lose the opportunity to gather any more evidence or to plan a more measured response. They'd know I knew, and they'd immediately start covering their tracks. No, bursting in there might give a momentary release to my fury, but it wouldn't serve my long-term interests. I forced myself to take slow, deep breaths. The icy November wind was starting to seep in through the closed windows, or maybe I just felt cold because of the shock. I realized my face was wet. A tear had escaped and rolled down my cheek at some point. I wiped it away angrily. I needed to stay in control. After a few minutes, I turned the car back on to run the heater and keep myself inconspicuous. I wasn't sure what my next move was at that exact moment, so I decided to continue observing. Maybe I could get more evidence tonight. I waited for them to come out of the restaurant. It was a small place. They likely wouldn't stay too long if they had other plans. My mind went to that overnight bag Emily had carried. Were they planning to spend the night together? Perhaps at a hotel? Maybe even back to the Curtis or some other place. The idea of them sharing a hotel bed made my skin crawl, but it also gave me grim determination. I could possibly catch them in the act, or at least confirm beyond a shadow of a doubt what was going on. The more evidence I had, the better prepared I'd be for whatever came next, be it divorce, confrontation, or something else. It was about an hour later, roughly 8:30 p.m., when they emerged from Bella Trattoria. I sank low again as they walked arm in arm back toward the parking lot. They looked around, cautious, making sure no one they knew was in sight. Then they kissed again by her car. I snapped another photo of that. The pit in my stomach was still there, but by now it had hardened into a stone of resolve. They didn't part ways. Instead, Emily got into her own car and Brian went to his BMW. They were likely heading to the next destination together. Sure enough, they both pulled out of the lot with Emily following Brian's lead. I let them get a bit ahead, then followed at a distance. They drove deeper into downtown Buffalo. A few blocks later, I realized where they were heading. The Marriott by the waterfront. It was one of the taller hotels near Canal Side, known for its view of the lake. My mind flashed back to the Curtis receipt. It seemed these lovers had a taste for upscale rendezvous. I parked on the street half a block down where I could see the hotel entrance. The two cars pulled up to the valet stand. I saw Brian get out and toss his keys to the valet, then hand the valet something for Emily's car as well, likely arranging to park both. Emily stepped out, her overnight bag slung over her shoulder. They looked like any normal couple checking in for a getaway. My heart twisted painfully, seeing her stand next to him with the bag I'd carried for her on our own trips in happier times. At the check-in area, just inside the glass doors, I could see them at the counter together. Brian handled everything while Emily stood close by his side. Moments later, a concierge or bellhop guided them toward the elevators carrying their bag, her bag. I took a few photographs from the distance, one of them at the counter, though it was through glass and might not be clear, and one as they stepped into the elevator bank and disappeared from sight. That was it. They were gone for the night, off to whatever room they had booked. The betrayal was complete and undeniable. I sat back in my seat, feeling strangely calm now that the shock had settled. It was a deceptive calm, I knew. Underneath, a tempest of emotions was raging. Anger, hurt, disbelief, even a sense of dark clarity. But on the surface, I felt cold, ice cold. I realized I had been utterly naive these past weeks, possibly months. While I was going about my routine, trusting my wife, she had been carrying on this affair under my nose. Perhaps even laughing at me behind my back, or pitying me for being so oblivious. The humiliation burned nearly as much as the heartbreak. But I also realized something else as I watched the lights of their room flick on 20 floors up. I was done being naive. I was done being the trusting, forgiving husband who would just be heartbroken and walk away. If Emily and Brian thought they could do this to me and get away unscathed, they had another thing coming. I drove home that night in a daze, but within that daze, Ideas were already taking form. I didn't have a fully developed plan yet, but seeds of thought were sprouting in my mind. A plan for how I might respond, how I could turn this betrayal back on them. The engineer in me sought a solution, a design for retribution that would make them regret ever thinking I was an easy fool. When I got back to our empty house, I sat in the dark living room for a long time, replaying the night's events in my head until the hurt began to transform into a resolve. Emily wouldn't be home until morning at the earliest if she bothered coming home at all before work. She had told me she'd be working late and likely leaving early for work from staying at a coworker's near the office. Another lie she texted after checking into the hotel to ensure I wouldn't worry if I happened to message her during the night. I read that text. She had sent it around 9 p.m., probably crashing at a colleague's apartment near the office so I can be in early. Hope your trip went well. Love you. Good night. How dare she sign off with love you from another man's bed? My fist clenched around the phone, and for a second I thought I might hurl it at the wall. But I didn't. I needed my phone intact for what would come next. I typed a short reply with stiff fingers. Okay. Good night. I had to pretend everything was normal. Then I sat in silence for a very long time. The only sound was the furnace occasionally kicking in, blowing warm air through the vents to fight the November chill. I felt cold despite it. Eventually, I stood and walked over to the window. Outside, tiny flurries of snow had begun drifting down under the streetlights, the first dusting of the coming winter. Winter in Buffalo can be brutal, and it looked like it was arriving early this year. I realized my marriage was entering its own winter. Cold, dark, and unforgiving. And I intended to make it a harsh one for those who had wronged me. On that night in the quiet dark of my home, I made a promise to myself. I would not confront them in a fit of rage and pain. No, I would be calculated. I would gather evidence. I would plan meticulously. And when I struck, it would be devastating. They had made a fool of me, broken our vows, and trampled on everything we had built. For that, they would pay dearly. And I, Mark Sullivan, the calm, logical engineer who everyone thought could be taken for granted, would coldly engineer their downfall. Chapter 2. Gathering Evidence. The next morning, I awoke with a clarity of purpose that cut through the haze of pain. Emily was already up and about, humming lightly to herself in the kitchen as she brewed coffee. She was acting as if it were any other day. And for her, maybe it was. She likely assumed I was none the wiser. She glanced up with a warm smile when I walked in. "Good morning, honey. You're back early," she said, as though my supposed trip had been routine. She was dressed smartly for work, a navy blouse and skirt, looking every bit the professional heading off to manage her team. I had decided on my cover story. I'd tell her the out-of-town client meeting ended late last night, and I drove back early this morning. "Morning," I replied, forcing a yawn. "Yeah, I got in around 5 a.m. Figured I'd catch a little more sleep on the couch so I wouldn't wake you." Emily nodded, pouring me a cup of coffee. "Must have been exhausting. You sure you're okay to go into work today?" I shrugged. "I'll manage. Maybe just a half day. The meeting was long, but at least it's done." I sipped the coffee, hoping the mug hid the bitterness in my expression. Here we were, talking about my fake trip, both of us lying through our teeth in one conversation. "I'm glad it went well," she said, coming over to give me a peck on the cheek. I held still, managing not to flinch. "And thanks for the text last night. It helped me plan my morning." I bet it did, I thought. Aloud, I said, "Of course." She headed out the door soon after, giving me a little wave and a casual, "Love you. See you tonight." The door closed behind her, and I was left standing in the kitchen, the coffee growing cold in my hand. My jaw tightened. This was the last time, I vowed, that I would be the clueless, doting husband in her eyes. The charade would continue for a while longer, but only so I could position everything to strike back. Once I heard her car drive away, I immediately got to work. I called into my office and told them I had an urgent personal matter and would be taking a couple of days off. Being a valued senior engineer had its perks. My boss was understanding and told me to take all the time I needed. My first task was to find a private investigator. I sat down at my computer in our small study and searched for reputable private investigation firms in Buffalo that specialized in infidelity cases. There were more than I expected. Sadly, cheating spouses are a common problem everywhere. I read through reviews and websites, my eyes skimming over phrases like discreet surveillance, confidential consultations, and photo-video evidence. One firm, Niagara Investigative Solutions, caught my attention with numerous positive testimonials about their professionalism. I dialed their number, my heart thumping as I did. A receptionist answered, her tone polite and efficient. Niagara Investigative Solutions. How may we assist you? I swallowed, then spoke in as steady a voice as I could muster. I, I'd like to inquire about hiring an investigator for a possible infidelity case. Her voice softened just a touch. I'm sorry to hear that. We handle many such cases. We can certainly help you gather evidence. Would you like to schedule a consultation with one of our investigators? We have an opening later today. Yes, please, I said, relief flooding me at how easy that was. We arranged a meeting for that afternoon at their office on the outskirts of the city. With that set, I turned to another critical call, a lawyer. I didn't want to use our family lawyer, the one who helped us with the house purchase, as he'd likely be too neutral and possibly even friendly with Emily. Instead, I looked up top-rated divorce attorneys in Buffalo. One name, Charles McElroy, appeared repeatedly as a highly regarded family law attorney who didn't shy away from contentious cases. A colleague of mine from work had mentioned McElroy once, saying he was the shark you call when you need to win. That sounded exactly like what I needed. I stepped out to my car with my phone. I didn't want any chance of Emily seeing a call to a divorce lawyer on our shared phone plan records or redial list. Using my car's Bluetooth, I called McElroy's office. After a couple of transfers, I got his paralegal, and soon I had an appointment set for the next day. I kept the details vague, saying I wanted a consultation regarding a potential divorce and that there were issues of infidelity. That was enough. They told me to bring any evidence I had and that the first meeting would be confidential. Next, I knew I needed to gather and safeguard whatever evidence and assets I could before Emily even got a hint of what was coming. I fetched a secure USB drive and transferred the photos I'd taken last night from my phone onto it, then deleted any traces of them from the device itself. I also carefully placed the incriminating hotel receipt into a folder, along with printed copies of our cell phone statement and bank statements, in case I needed them for the lawyer or just to keep a record. While combing through the phone bill online, my suspicions found further confirmation. Listed were multiple lengthy calls and dozens of text messages from Emily's number to a number I recognized as belonging to Brian Watson. They mostly occurred in the evenings or during times I knew I wasn't around. Seeing those logs in black and white still made my stomach twist, but they also steeled my resolve. I'd make sure those details were noted for the PI and lawyer as well. Then I turned to our finances. If Emily had the gall to lie to me so thoroughly, who was to say she wouldn't try to clean out our joint accounts or credit lines if she sensed trouble? I logged into our online banking and quietly initiated a transfer of half of our joint savings into a new individual account under my name alone. Technically, it was still marital property, but at least she'd have a harder time making it vanish on a whim. I also changed the passwords to our bank and investment accounts, and to my own credit card accounts. If she tried to access them, she'd be in for a surprise, but importantly, she rarely did any of the online banking, leaving that to me, so I doubted she'd notice quickly. Our home was another concern. We jointly owned our house in Amherst, and though I wasn't sure how the divorce would play out, I preemptively copied all important home documents, deed, mortgage info, tax statements, into a personal folder. If this turned into the legal fight, I wanted to be prepared with paperwork at hand. As I organized, I found myself cycling through waves of anguish and anger. At times I'd pause, a piece of paper in my hand, as a memory of Emily and happier days surfaced. Like the day we moved into this house, both of us painting the living room and splattering each other with paint, laughing. I'd feel a lump in my throat, a temptation to ask how it had come to this. But then I'd hear the echo of her laugh from last night in that parking lot with him, see the image of them kissing behind my eyes, and the lump would harden into a ball of ice. She made her choice, I reminded myself grimly. Now I make mine. By early afternoon, I felt I had made significant headway. The initial shock was being replaced by a cold, operational focus. I grabbed the folder of evidence and notes I had compiled and headed out to meet the private investigator. The PI's office was in a bland beige building off a quiet road. Fitting, I thought, for a business that thrives on not drawing attention. Inside, a receptionist showed me to a modest conference room where I met Frank Moretti, the investigator assigned to my case. Frank was a stocky man in his 50s with a neatly trimmed gray beard and an air of seasoned calm. His handshake was firm, and his eyes, world-weary but kind enough, told me he'd probably seen this situation far too many times. "So tell me what's been going on," Frank said gently once we were seated. I took a breath and for the first time spoke aloud the words I had been dreading. "My wife is cheating on me." My voice wavered just a bit, but I steadied it. "I recently discovered she's having an affair. With her boss." Frank nodded, listening intently. I continued, laying out a concise summary. The suspicious behavior, the hotel receipt, the fact that I'd followed her and witnessed a rendezvous with her boss, Brian, last night. I slid my phone across the table to show him the best of the photos I'd taken. He examined them, then returned the phone. "You've already gathered some good evidence on your own," he said. "I'm sorry you're going through this. It's tough." I appreciated that he didn't offer platitudes beyond that. "Thank you. I'm hiring you because I need more. I need everything I can get." Frank flipped open a notebook. "Certainly. Our goal would be to document the affair thoroughly. Dates, times, places, ideally clear photographs or video of the two together. That can be important for legal purposes. And just to give you clarity, we can also do some background on this man if you want to see if there's anything else going on with him." I nodded. "Absolutely. I want as much information as possible, not just for divorce." I hesitated, wondering how much to reveal of my deeper intentions. But something about Frank's steady gaze made me trust him with a bit more. "I'll be honest, I don't just want to file for divorce quietly and move on. They have hurt me in a way I can't overlook. I plan to make them face consequences socially, professionally. I want to upend their lives in the way they've upended mine." Frank's face remained neutral, but he gave a slow nod. "I see. Well, while I can't involve myself in anything illegal, I can gather the information you might need to pursue whatever legal and personal actions you see fit." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Many clients come in angry like you, wanting not just proof but some form of justice or revenge. I'll help get you evidence. What you do with it will be up to you. Just be sure you're prepared for the fallout." His candor was oddly grounding. "I understand. I'm not going to do anything that gets me in trouble," I replied. "But if there are ways to hit them where it hurts, reputation, career, finances, I intend to find them. For example, if you uncover anything about Brian, say he's done this before at work or any financial impropriety, I want to know." Frank's eyes narrowed shrewdly. "We can certainly look into Mr. Watson," Frank agreed. "I have colleagues skilled in background checks. We can see if he's had other affairs or any recorded misconduct or civil suits. Sometimes patterns emerge with these things." He then laid out the plan for surveillance. We discussed schedules. When Emily claimed to be working late, when Brian's wife might be out of town, I realized I should mention that he was married too. Frank made a note of that. I gave him whatever details I could. Brian's home address in Williamsville, as much of his work schedule as I knew from Emily's accounts, and the fact that Monday and Thursday nights were frequent meetup times based on Emily's excuses. Frank recommended placing a GPS tracker on Emily's car to easily monitor her movements. "Since the car is jointly owned, you have the right to track it," he said, a necessary legal reassurance. "Can you get access to it for a short time so I can install a device?" I almost laughed. Getting access to my own wife's car was the least of my worries. "Yes, she leaves it parked in our garage at night. I can make sure it's available." We arranged that he or one of his team would swing by my house discreetly the next evening to plant the tracker while I ensured Emily was occupied inside. As for Brian's car, that would be trickier. But Frank said if they tail him, they might not even need a tracker on his. Emily's movements would likely be enough since she usually met him somewhere. The PI service wasn't cheap. Surveillance like this over multiple days and background checks add up. But I barely blinked at the cost. Money was secondary now. I signed the contract for their services, my pen scratching out my name on a document that formalized turning my life into a case file. It felt strange, but also necessary. When I left Frank's office, I shook his hand. His grip was reassuring. "Well, we'll get started right away, Mr. Sullivan. Take care of yourself." Stepping out into the crisp afternoon air, I felt a guarded sense of accomplishment. This was the first concrete step toward taking back control. Later that day, I met with Mr. McElroy, the divorce attorney, at his downtown office. Charles McElroy turned out to be a sharp-eyed man in his early 60s with a no-nonsense manner. We sat in a conference room lined with legal books while I explained the broad strokes of my situation. He asked a few pointed questions. Had I confirmed the identity of the other man? Did we have children? Thankfully, no. How long had we been married? What assets we had? I provided straightforward answers, and then handed him a copy of the hotel receipt and told him about the photos and PI involvement. He reviewed the receipt, pursing his lips. Adultery is technically still on the books as a fault ground for divorce in New York, he said. In practice, most divorces go through on no-fault grounds these days. However, evidence of adultery can be useful. For one, it might influence settlement negotiations. Your wife might be more inclined to accept your terms if she knows you can prove her infidelity in court. It can also affect spousal support. Generally, New York courts won't punish a cheating spouse financially just for cheating. But if marital funds were spent on the affair, or if the adultery was particularly egregious, it could sway a judge's discretion in things like maintenance or even distribution in rare cases. I nodded, absorbing that. So, practically speaking, if I can prove she's been unfaithful in spending our money doing it, I tap the hotel receipt. Then I might be able to ensure she doesn't get alimony, for instance. McElroy steepled his fingers. If you can show she used marital assets on the affair, like that hotel stay, gifts, trips, what have you, I can argue for a credit back to you in the asset division. And New York judges do sometimes deny alimony to an adulterous spouse, especially if the cheating is proven and seen as the cause of the marriage breakdown. It's not guaranteed, but your leverage is significantly better with hard evidence of the affair. That was what I wanted to hear. I had no intention of rewarding her betrayal with a single dime more than she legally might be due. In fact, if I had my way, she'd walk away with nothing. We discussed the general steps ahead. McElroy advised not tipping my hand too soon and continuing to gather evidence. Once you're ready to proceed, we can file for divorce on grounds of adultery or no fault, whichever strategy fits best. Sometimes just the threat of a fault divorce airing her misconduct will push a quick settlement. He gave me a thin, knowing smile. People like your wife and her paramour often prefer their private sins stay private. That can be used to your advantage. Before I left, I asked McElroy about any other precautions. He reiterated what I'd already done. Protect the money, secure important documents, and avoid confrontation that might give her reason to file something first or accuse me of anything. Keep things civil until you're ready to move. And absolutely no posting or public accusations yet. Those can backfire legally, he warned. I assured him I would play it cool. We parted with an agreement that I'd loop him in when I felt I had enough evidence or when I was ready to file the papers. By the time I walked out of the lawyer's office, the sun had dipped low. An early sunset of late fall casting long shadows across Main Street. I felt tired, but it was a productive, purposeful tired. In the last 24 hours, my life had come crashing down, and I had stood up, dusted myself off, and begun quietly building the machinery of payback. That evening, I returned home a little before Emily for once. I had told her via text that I was feeling under the weather and might skip work or at least come home early using the excuse of yesterday's long trip to cover. She responded with concern, of course. "Oh no, hope you're okay. Get some rest, I'll bring home dinner." I replied, telling her not to worry. I'd handle dinner. Part of me wondered if she was genuinely concerned or just nervous that I might have sent something. Hard to tell. To keep myself busy and to look natural, I decided to cook. Chopping vegetables and searing meat gave me something to focus on other than my boiling thoughts. By the time Emily walked through the door around 7:30 p.m., the house smelled of rosemary and garlic from the roast chicken I had in the oven. "Hey, I'm home," she called out in that sing-song voice of hers. She kicked off her heels by the entryway and came into the kitchen, setting down her purse. Something smells good." "Roast chicken," I said, stirring a pot of mashed potatoes. I gave her a small smile. "Figured I'd make us a real dinner." She looked pleasantly surprised. "That's sweet. How are you feeling? Any better?" I lied with practiced ease. "A bit tired, but okay. Thought cooking might help distract me from the headache." Emily stepped closer and unexpectedly wrapped her arms around me from behind, resting her chin on my shoulder. The gesture was something she might have done on any ordinary night in our happier times. But now, it took everything in me not to stiffen or pull away. Her touch felt foreign, almost irritating. knowing where those hands had been just last night. "Thank you for this," she said softly. "I'm sorry I've been so busy lately, with work and all. I feel like I haven't been pulling my weight here at home." I had to swallow a surge of bitterness. Busy with work? That's the story she's going with. I know you've got a lot going on," I managed neutrally. "Let's just enjoy dinner and relax tonight." She released me and went to change out of her work clothes. I took a steadying breath once she left the room. Moments like that, embrace, were dangerous. My anger was so close to the surface I worried I might betray it. But I'd done well. I stayed relaxed, even patted her hand as it circled my waist as if nothing were wrong. Over dinner, we fell into our familiar pattern of small talk. Emily recounted a funny incident at the office. I wondered which parts were true and which colleagues might suspect that the incident wasn't the most interesting thing that happened to her that day. She mentioned that Brian had approved some new software purchase she recommended, and she said his name without a blink of guilt on her face. She was either an incredible actress or had compartmentalized her affairs so thoroughly that normal life and Brian life were separate in her mind. Perhaps both. I played the part of the mildly tired but attentive husband, nodding and asking just enough questions. None cut too deep. I didn't trust myself to dig anyway. I was afraid my voice might crack with anger if I asked, "So how is Brian these days?" Or something equally revealing. As I watched her talk, smiling over her wine at me, I couldn't help scrutinizing her face. Was there guilt in her eyes? Did her smiles reach all the way, or were they shallower than before? I caught a distant look in her eyes once or twice as if her mind drifted. Perhaps to him? Or maybe she was worried about something. Could she be feeling a pang of remorse? Or was she completely at ease thinking I'd never discover her betrayal? The possibility that our entire dinner was essentially an illusion, a brittle normalcy perched atop a lie, fueled my determination. I kept my mask firmly in place, responding appropriately, even managing a light laugh when she told a humorous anecdote. After dinner, we cleaned up together. It was so domestic and cordial, one would think we were just any loving couple winding down for the evening. The irony almost made me sick, but I held it together. I had to. That night, I went to bed a bit earlier than usual, claiming lingering exhaustion. Emily seemed content to let me sleep, and she herself was occupied on her laptop for a while. Though whether she was actually working or perhaps sending sweet nothings to Brian, I had no idea. I didn't want to know, not at that moment. Lying in the darkness, I stared at the ceiling, listening to the faint clicks of her keyboard from the next room and later the sound of water running as she prepared for bed. When she finally slipped under the covers next to me, I kept my breathing steady and pretended to be mostly asleep. She whispered a soft, "Good night," and I mumbled in return. I couldn't bring myself to say good night or "I love you" back. As I felt the mattress shift with her weight, a cold clarity filled me. This phase, this careful tactical phase, would be hard. Living alongside her, pretending everything was fine, might be one of the toughest things I'd ever done. But it was necessary. For my plan to work, she had to remain unsuspecting. In the silent darkness, I repeated a quiet mantra to myself, in rhythm with our breaths. Be patient. Stick to the plan. Prepare. Each breath in and out was a count toward the day I'd take action. I thought of the evidence that would soon come rolling in from the PI, the strategy I'd craft with my lawyer, the ways I could pull the rug out from under her and Brian when the time was right. These thoughts were the only thing that finally lulled me into a light, fitful sleep. I dreamed of wolves that night. Wolves chasing down oblivious prey across a frozen field. And when I woke up in the gray pre-dawn, heart pounding, I realized I had been smiling in the dream. I knew what I had to become. Patient, relentless, and lethal in my calculated way. The preparation was underway. The evidence would be gathered. And soon enough, I would be ready to spring the trap on the two of them. Chapter 3. Setting the Trap. The weeks that followed were a study in duality. By day, I maintained the facade of my normal life in Buffalo, going to work, chatting with neighbors about whose driveway needed snow shoveling after the latest dusting, spending evenings with my wife as if nothing had changed. By night, and in every private moment I could seize, I was carefully constructing the downfall of two people who remained utterly unaware of the storm gathering around them. It was exhausting, living this double life, but each time the strain nearly showed, I reminded myself of the endgame. I often thought of that analogy of a wolf stalking prey. I was patient, moving in plain sight but never revealing my true intent until the moment to strike. Frank, the PI, kept me updated with a steady stream of evidence. Some of it I expected, some still had the power to make my hands tremble with anger, even as I cataloged it clinically. He and his team shadowed Emily and Brian whenever they slipped away to be together. There were photographs of them meeting at a hotel off the interstate, not the Marriott this time, but a smaller place perhaps chosen to avoid notice. One series of photos showed them arriving separately, checking in at the front desk, their body language painfully familiar and coordinated, then later leaving together with discreet smiles on their faces. Another set captured them having lunch on a Wednesday at a cafe near her office, sitting on the same side of a booth, heads close together as Brian's hand rested on her thigh under the table. The most damning piece arrived via email from Frank one Friday evening. A short, shaky video taken by an undercover operative at a downtown boutique hotel. It showed Emily and Brian in the lobby, openly holding hands as they waited for an elevator. When the doors opened, Brian briefly leaned in to kiss her neck in what he probably thought was a private gesture. The camera angle was partially obscured by a plant, but it clearly caught Emily's face, eyes closed, smiling in a way that used to be reserved for me. I watched that video exactly once, then closed it. It felt like drinking poison, but I forced it down to inoculate myself against any remaining sympathy for her. I saved a copy to the secure drive and noted the timestamp. Frank also gathered intel on Brian's background. Officially, Brian Watson was a model citizen. No criminal record, a solid career with accolades in his industry, active in a local Rotary Club. Married for 15 years, 2 kids in grade school. If you looked at his LinkedIn or the company website, you'd see a polished executive who led charity initiatives and mentored junior employees. Of course, that image was a lie, as we knew. Unofficially, through some contacts and quiet inquiries, Frank heard whisperings that this wasn't Brian's first office affair. Apparently, a couple of years ago, there had been rumors of him getting too friendly with another female subordinate. That woman had abruptly transferred to a different branch of the company. Nothing was ever proven or made public, but it suggested a pattern. The man had gotten away with it before, an experienced adulterer who likely thought he was untouchable. That tidbit delighted me in a dark way. It meant that when I exposed him, the fall would be from an even greater height of self-assured arrogance. His HR department might also be less inclined to show mercy if they suspected this wasn't an isolated incident. As for Emily, the PI's surveillance confirmed what I already knew in my heart. There was no doubt or ambiguity left. They had their routines and signals. She would often take her own car and meet him somewhere after sending me a text about working late, or occasionally she'd claim a girl's night and then rendezvous with him. The GPS tracker we planted on her car revealed the addresses of their trysts. A pattern of locations emerged, including his house on one afternoon when his wife was out. That one particularly made my blood boil. He brought her into the home he shared with his family. I channeled my anger into meticulous planning. Every piece of evidence was indexed and backed up in multiple secure places. I had photos, videos, phone logs, copies of suspicious credit card charges. The initial hotel receipt wasn't the only one, it turned out. There were a couple of fancy restaurant charges on her card that coincided with dates I now knew she was with him. There was no chance either of them could deny what they'd done. As November turned to December and the first heavy snows of winter blanketed Buffalo, I knew the time was drawing near. I didn't want to wait too long. Every day I stayed in that sham of a marriage was a day of personal hell. But I also understood that executing revenge is like engineering a complex machine. All the parts must be in place and tested before you flip the switch. So I carefully crafted a step-by-step blueprint for the retribution I would unleash. Late one night, in my home office with Emily asleep down the hall, I opened a notebook and wrote down the core objectives and steps of my plan, under the heading Operation Winter's End, a private little joke with myself about ending the winter of my discontent. The plan looks something like this. Finalize evidence collection. Ensure I had undeniable proof of the affair, photos, videos, timestamps, and any other wrongdoing. Coordinate with Frank to wrap up surveillance and compile the final report. Secure allies and legal position. Quietly get my lawyer, Charles, ready to file divorce papers and an emergency motion regarding assets if needed. Have him prepare the documents so they could be served at a moment's notice. Set the stage at their workplace. Expose the affair to Emily and Brian's employer in a way that guarantees maximum professional fallout. This involves sending an anonymous package of evidence to their company's HR and possibly executives, detailing their breach of company policy. Spring the legal trap, criminal angle. Leverage a carefully planted piece of falsified evidence to get law enforcement involved, catching them in a compromising, unlawful situation. I had decided by now to plant illicit drugs in Brian's car and arrange for a police stop, a risky move, but if it succeeded, it would thoroughly ruin them beyond just losing jobs. Social ruin and exposure. Simultaneously, reveal the affair to key people in their personal lives, Brian's wife Linda, and our close friends and family, ensuring they face social humiliation and support systems collapse. I plan to time this by sending out copies of evidence or messages once the dominoes started falling. Execute divorce and financial protection. Once they were reeling from the above blows, serve Emily with divorce papers at the most impactful moment, ensuring she is left with minimal resources and support. Use the evidence and the leverage of her adultery to eliminate any claims she might have on our assets beyond what the law strictly requires. Exit cleanly. Ensure that nothing traced back to me illegally and that I stayed within plausible deniability bounds for the more underhanded parts. Anonymous tips, planted evidence. Walk away with my freedom, finances, and future intact while they deal with the wreckage. Reading over these steps, I felt a grim satisfaction. It was a comprehensive takedown, hitting them from every angle. It might have seemed over the top, but every time I recalled Emily's lies and Brian's smirking face in those photos, any notion of mercy evaporated. They had orchestrated my betrayal. I would orchestrate their comeuppance. I moved into action. First, I let Frank know to prepare the final packet for me. A thorough report of the affair with dates, photos, and his sworn affidavit attesting to what he documented. This would be part of what I would send anonymously to the higher-ups at their workplace and would also sit ready for my lawyer. Frank, perhaps sensing the shift in me, asked if I was sure I had everything I needed. I told him yes, and that he should be ready for a call from me at short notice for a final task. I intended to use him to deliver some packages on D-Day to avoid them being traced to me. Next, I handled the most dangerous element, the drug plant. I spent a cold December Saturday doing something I never in my life imagined I would do, procuring illegal narcotics. Through a college acquaintance, who shall remain nameless, with whom I vaguely kept in touch, a guy who had fallen into a shady lifestyle running a vape and CBD shop that I suspected fronted other substances, I managed to buy a small bag of cocaine. It took a few subtle inquiries and an uncomfortable meetup in a parking lot under the pretense of grabbing a drink to catch up. But cash is persuasive. I left that encounter with my heart hammering, not just from the paranoia of doing something illicit, but from the fierce certainty that this little baggie would be a key to unlocking Brian and Emily's ruin. I handled it with gloves from the moment I got it and stored it in a magnetic mini container I'd acquired, the kind one could easily stick behind a metal panel in a car's trunk. The opportunity to plant it came sooner than I expected. According to Frank's reports, Emily and Brian had a habit of meeting on Monday evenings at a quiet gym where they'd ostensibly work out, but in reality spend half the time in the sauna together. The PI even got a snap of them sneaking a kiss in that private corner of the gym. One Monday, I left work a bit early and tailed Brian's BMW to that gym. I parked a few slots away in the dimly lit lot. Once I saw both of them go inside, I caught a glimpse of Emily in her exercise leggings laughing at something he said as they disappeared through the entrance. I made my move. With a wool cap pulled low and a scarf high around my face, it was easy to look like just another bundled-up Buffalonian in the freezing night. I approached Brian's car. The location was ideal. No security cameras outside that I could see, and the far corner of the lot was dark where he'd parked. Using a thin strip of the metal I'd prepared, thank you online lockpicking tutorials, I managed to jimmy the driver's door lock in under a minute. My heart thudded as the door popped open. I quickly slid into the car and shut the door behind me. The interior smelled like his cologne, a scent I recognized from when I'd met him, a mix of cedar and spice that now made me sick. Working by the light of a small pen flashlight, I reached under the driver's seat and firmly pressed the magnetic container up against a metal crossbar there. It stuck. To an unknowing eye, it would just look like a small part of the seat frame. Satisfied, I carefully wiped down anything I might have touched, closed the door, and retreated to my car. The entire operation took less than 3 minutes. No one came or went in that time. I exhaled for what felt like the first time and drove off, hands shaking on the wheel, adrenaline making my whole body tremble. It was done. The bait was in place. Now, I needed to set up the takedown. I spent the next few days preparing the stage. Using a secure, anonymous email service, I drafted a message to the HR department of Emily and Brian's company. I deliberately did it from a public Wi-Fi network at a cafe far from home, with all identifying info stripped. The email was succinct but potent. It explained that I was an anonymous whistleblower who had evidence of a senior manager, Brian Watson, conducting an inappropriate sexual relationship with a direct report, Emily Sullivan, in violation of company policy. I wrote that attached you would find time-stamped photographs of them together at various locations. I attached a few of the clearest, least deniable photos, plus details about the times they purported to be on the clock or at work, but were elsewhere. I emphasized how their actions could expose the company to liability. This angle often spurs HR into swift action, I figured. I did not mention that I was the husband, best to appear like maybe a concerned colleague or just someone who stumbled on the information. I set that email to send at 9 a.m. on what I was beginning to think of as D-Day. For Brian's wife, Linda, I prepared a more personal touch. I printed out a selection of photos, the least abstract ones, including a photo of Emily and Brian entering a hotel hand in hand, and one of them kissing by her car. I also wrote a short letter with sincere sympathy, somewhat genuine, because as much as I hated Brian, I felt for Linda and their children, and explained that I had discovered my spouse and her husband were having an affair. I kept it relatively gentle but clear, providing dates and places that I knew Brian had lied to her about, information I gleaned from cross-referencing times he was with Emily, versus likely told his wife he was working late or on business. I included my email, an alias one, in case she wanted to reach out. I didn't want to confront her in person. She deserved to process this in private. The package was labeled with her name but no return address. I hired a courier service, paying extra for a same-day morning delivery to deliver that envelope to Linda on D-Day as well. I deliberately timed it so she would get it mid-morning. I imagined her opening it in her kitchen or wherever. At roughly the same time, HR would be opening the email at the office. The dominoes were lined up. The last element was the police. Through some online research, I found the tip line for the local Buffalo Police Narcotics Unit. I decided I would make the call on D-Day from a pay-as-you-go burner phone that I'd already purchased with cash. My plan was to call in and report that I was a concerned citizen who saw what looked like a drug deal and stashing of drugs in a car matching Brian's BMW description and license plate, providing the location and direction the car was heading. With any luck, they'd stop him and search the car. Given the very real cocaine hidden under his seat, they'd find it. And then, well, then the justice system could take it from there. At minimum, it would be an arrest for possession of a controlled substance, possibly intent to distribute, since I made sure the quantity was right around the borderline amount that could raise suspicions of dealing. It was a bold part of the plan, the riskiest, because it introduced variables I couldn't fully control. What if, for instance, by sheer chance someone else found the drugs earlier, unlikely, or what if the police didn't act on the tip? I had to accept some uncertainty, but I did things to tilt odds in my favor. I chose D-Day to be one of their known meetup days, so I knew they'd be together. A witness might say a man and woman in the car using drugs to get both in trouble. I also decided to place the call when I knew they'd be on the road, likely after being kicked out of work or otherwise, midday. D-Day was set for the following Wednesday. It was the middle of the week, typically when fewer staff might be in HR early, to avoid immediate confrontation in person until maybe a meeting could be scheduled. And importantly, I knew from Emily's own calendar that she and Brian had a working lunch meeting off-site, blocked that day, which almost certainly meant an illicit rendezvous. Perfect. They'd likely take one car. Let it be his, with the surprise waiting inside. On the night of Tuesday, I could barely sleep. Emily was sound asleep next to me, oblivious to the hurricane about to hit her life the next morning. I lay there, eyes open in the dark, running through each detail repeatedly. Had I forgotten anything? Was anything likely to point back to me? I had been so careful, but my nerves were taut. Still, beneath the anxiety was a grim anticipation. I thought I would feel guilt. After all, I was about to effectively destroy the life of the woman I had once planned to spend forever with. But I searched my conscience in those midnight hours and found very little pity left. She had been making choices day after day to lie to my face and betray our marriage. Actions have consequences. If I was pushing those consequences to an extreme, well, she shouldn't have lit the spark if she didn't want to face the inferno. At dawn on Wednesday, I quietly left the house under the guise of going to work early. In truth, I had taken the day off under the radar. I left Emily a note by the coffee maker, an innocuous, had to head in early for a project, have a good day message, to keep her completely unsuspecting. She'd likely forward it to Brian with a smiley face, thinking our house was clear for her deceit. Little did she know, as she drove to the office, that I was already downtown in my car, parked in a lot across the street from her building, ready to watch everything unfold. I sipped a thermos of coffee, hands steady, eyes on the lobby of her company. The snow from earlier in the week had been plowed into gray heaps by the sidewalks. The cold didn't bother me at all. I felt almost numb to it, laser-focused on the task at hand. At 9 o'clock a.m. sharp, I saw a pair of suited figures hustle across the street and enter the lobby, not employees, from the look of them, but couriers. Right on schedule. Those would be from the courier service delivering the envelope to HR. I'd arranged a direct handoff to ensure receipt. At nearly the same time, I hit send on the pre-drafted anonymous email from my laptop. It whooshed off into cyberspace toward the company's HR and executive inboxes. I sat back and whispered to myself, "It's showtime." Chapter 4. The Downfall. The next hours passed in a blur of adrenaline-charged events. I watched from my vantage point as chaos quietly began to unfold. Around 9:30 a.m., I saw movement that caught my attention through the lobby's glass doors. A suited woman and man, likely HR personnel, flanking Emily as she walked out of the building. My wife, no, Emily, I corrected myself. She felt like less of a wife to me now than a stranger, looked pale and shell-shocked even from a distance. She clutched her purse with both hands, the posture of someone feeling exposed and defensive. Not far behind, another pair emerged. Brian and a stern-looking older man in a blazer, perhaps a senior executive. Brian's face was red. Even at a distance, I could tell he was protesting, gesturing angrily, while the older man shook his head and motioned him forward. It seemed HR had split them up, likely confronting each separately, and were now escorting both off the premises to avoid a scene. Emily's eyes were downcast, cheeks wet with tears. She nodded rapidly at whatever the HR woman was quietly saying, as if in a daze. Brian, however, looked enraged. He tried to argue even as the executive guided him firmly toward the exit. I sank lower in my seat as they stepped out onto the sidewalk. Emily looked around in disoriented misery, perhaps subconsciously seeking a friendly face. For a brief moment, her gaze swept over the parking lot where I was, but I knew she couldn't see me behind the windshield glare. The HR woman handed Emily some papers, likely a formal notice of suspension or termination. Emily took them numbly. A few paces away, the executive did the same with Brian. Brian snatched the papers and shoved them into his pocket, his jaw tight with fury. They stood on the sidewalk 6 feet apart, not speaking to each other but bound by mutual disgrace. The HR team exchanged a glance, then retreated inside, leaving the two adulterers alone in the cold. Emily and Brian looked at each other. I saw her mouth move, perhaps saying, "What now?" Brian ran a hand through his hair, then beckoned her urgently. They hurried toward the parking garage next door. I knew where they were going, to Brian's car. They always drove together for their secret lunches, according to Frank. I started my car and pulled out to follow, keeping well back. My heart drummed. Next came the final act. It wasn't hard to trail them through downtown. They headed away from the office, likely to talk in private and figure out what to do. My phone lay ready in the cup holder. The burner phone was powered on and waiting. When I saw the silver BMW ahead of me make a turn onto a quieter side street, I knew it was time. I dialed the police tip line. A dispatcher answered immediately. In a deliberately flustered tone, I reported a suspicious vehicle, silver BMW, license plate matching Brian's, possibly hiding drugs. I claimed I'd seen a man and woman fiddling under the seat and exchanging a powdery bag in a parking lot. And now, they were driving on Delaware Avenue. I kept it short and urgent, then hung up. Not 2 minutes later, my pulse spiked as red and blue lights flashed behind me. A Buffalo PD cruiser sped past, siren blipping, and caught up to the BMW ahead. I hung back as Brian's car pulled to the curb. The police cruiser stopped behind it. I parked further down, partially hidden by a delivery van, and watched intently. Two officers approached, one on each side of the BMW. Even from where I sat, I could see Brian's animated gestures through the windshield. He was yelling, incredulous. After a brief exchange, the officer at his window motioned him out of the car. Brian refused, shaking his head angrily. The second cop opened the passenger side. Emily stepped out, visibly trembling even from afar. She was guided to the sidewalk, where she stood hugging herself. Things escalated. The first officer opened Brian's door and practically pulled him out when he continued arguing. Brian's voice carried faintly, "This is ridiculous. You have no right." He was silenced as the officer spun him around and pressed him against the car to frisk him. The second officer did the same with Emily, though she complied without resistance, her shoulders hunched in defeat. Moments later, one cop searched the BMW's interior. It didn't take long. I saw him straighten up, holding the small magnetic box I had planted. He opened it, then showed his partner the contents. A little plastic bag of white powder. Even half a block away, I could hear Emily's wail. "What? That's not mine. I don't know what that is." Brian turned his head, eyes wide with shock, protesting loudly. "Officer, I swear I've never seen that before." They were immediately handcuffed. The cops read them their rights while Brian sputtered and Emily sobbed openly. In that moment, their once cozy conspiracy was in shambles. They might even have been starting to blame each other for what was happening. Within minutes, a second patrol car arrived, backup for the drug bust. The officers placed Brian in the back of one cruiser and Emily in the other. As the cars prepared to depart, I caught a glimpse of my wife's face through the window. Pale, tear-streaked, a portrait of misery and fear. A dark satisfaction bloomed inside me. They were experiencing their own personal hell, one largely of my making, yes, but undeniably of their earning. Once the police pulled away with their new passengers, I slowly exhaled. My hands were steady on the wheel as I drove off in the opposite direction. It was done. They were caught, disgraced, and on their way to spend a very unpleasant day, or more, dealing with the legal system. I headed home to await the final piece, the personal confrontation that still lay ahead. I knew it would come soon, likely by nightfall, once Emily was released and had nowhere else to turn. I waited in silence, heart steady. I knew tonight I would finally face Emily, and I was ready. Chapter 5, Finale. The door creaked open and there she stood, Emily disheveled and shaking. She stepped inside cautiously. We faced each other across the living room in heavy silence. "Mark," she began, voice small and broken. I'm so sorry, I never meant for any of this." I held up a hand, stopping her. I was eerily calm. "I know what you've done, Emily." Her face crumpled. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Please, I know I hurt you. If you can ever forgive me, if we can talk." "Forgive?" A bitter edge cut into my voice. "You lied to me over and over. You destroyed our marriage. There's nothing left to talk about." She began sobbing. Between breaths, she choked out, "Everything is ruined. I got fired, and then the police. The drugs. I don't even know how." I fixed her with a cold stare. "I do. I put them there." Emily's eyes widened in shock. She understood then. How HR found out, how the police appeared at just the right time. "Oh my God, you—" "Yes," I said evenly. "I know about the affair. I've known for weeks. And I made sure you both paid for it." She pressed her hands to her mouth, horror and remorse mingling on her face. "You ruined my life," she whispered. "You ruined ours first," I replied. The truth fell like a hammer. She had no answer to that. After a long pause, I spoke quietly, tiredly. "It's over, Emily. I filed for divorce. You'll be served tomorrow." She shut her eyes, tears leaking. I might have felt pity once, but not now. "I'll pack some things," she said tremulously. I stepped aside and watched her disappear down the hall to our bedroom. Minutes later, she re-emerged with a small suitcase and duffel. eyes red and face drained of hope. A taxi pulled up outside. She paused at the open door, casting a final, pleading look my way. "I did love you," she said softly. "I'm so sorry I failed you." I said nothing for a moment, studying the woman I had once trusted with my whole heart. "Goodbye, Emily," I finally said, my voice firm. A sob broke from her lips. Clutching her bags, she turned and walked out into the night. I closed the door behind her, the latch clicking with grim finality. She was gone. I stood alone in the silent house that had once been full of our shared life. Despite the ache in my chest, I felt an unexpected sense of relief. The deception, the tension. It was all gone with her. It was over. Chapter 6, Epilogue. 6 months later, on a warm June afternoon, I stroll along Buffalo's canal side with a gentle breeze at my back. The world looks bright and new, much like the life I've built since that dark winter. The fallout from that day was significant, but I've come through it. My divorce from Emily was finalized quietly in the spring. She offered little resistance. In truth, there wasn't much she could do. We sold our house, and I've moved into a loft apartment downtown with a view of Lake Erie. It's a fresh start, unburdened by painful memories. Emily returned to her parents' home for a while. The drug charges against her were dropped. Brian ultimately took responsibility, sparing her a trial, but her reputation was another story. She lost her job and many friends. I hear she's working and trying to rebuild her life far from me. As for Brian, he pleaded guilty to a minor offense and avoided jail, but he didn't escape consequences either. His marriage shattered, Linda filed for divorce immediately, and his career was effectively over. He left Buffalo not long after, carrying the weight of his own disgrace. And me? I've let go of the anger. In the months since, I focused on healing and looking ahead. I met someone, in fact. Her name is Nicole. We were introduced by a mutual friend, and while I'm taking things slow, I feel a warmth and sincerity from her that I haven't felt in a long time. This afternoon, she walks beside me at the water's edge, fingers intertwined with mine as we share stories and laughter. As the sun sparkles on the lake, I realize how far I've come. The man I was 6 months ago felt betrayed and broken. Now I feel strong, hopeful, and free. Free from lies, free to be myself again. We pause by the railing, and Nicole leans her head on my shoulder. I wrap an arm around her, grateful. Not long ago, I believed I might never trust or love again. Yet here I am, heart open to new possibilities. I won't pretend the road was easy, but I emerged from that trial smarter and more resilient. I learned that justice can take many forms. Sometimes it's the dramatic downfall of those who wronged you. Other times, it's simply regaining your peace and moving on. In my case, I got both. Emily and her lover faced the consequences of their actions, and I gained something invaluable, a second chance at happiness. As we continue our walk, I take a deep breath of summer air and smile. The past is behind me. Each step I take now is towards a brighter future. Whatever comes next, I know I'll face it with clear eyes and a steady heart. I have survived the storm and come out the other side, wiser, calmer, and ready to live on my own terms. In the end, that is the greatest victory of all.